So I had the privilege on Thursday. The Christian or the Wheaton Event Center had a praise and worship night, and if you were there, it was wonderful. It was a full house. Cody did an amazing job. I know he doesn't usually like accolades, but he did an amazing job. And bringing the worship, and I was privileged to speak there. And I've been in ministry now for probably about 19, 20 years, and I continue to be humbled by the platforms that God allows me to speak in, and in the lives that He lets me speak into. Because if you knew me growing up, you would have never guessed that this is where I would have been. And that's okay, and I think that's just part of my story. But as we get into the Word this morning, so we're going to find ourselves in Ecclesiastes 9 and 10. My goal was to kind of cover both of them. I realized last week I never got to Ecclesiastes 9. I feel like Ecclesiastes 8 was a lot. And Solomon in all of his wisdom talks about the importance of respecting authority and learning how to operate within the context of the authority that exists. And so, again, he says all that because he's a king. So let's be honest, there's some benefit to him saying, obey the king. But he says it really because he understands that all governing powers are controlled by God. God is sovereign. He's not surprised. Like I always tell people around election season, but oh, they won. I'm like, well, God wasn't like, oh no, I can't believe it. Like that's not how He works, right? And so Solomon in his wisdom says, listen, we have to learn to respect those who are in place, even if we don't agree with them. We're called to pray for them. And Paul talks about this in his letter to the Romans, to the church in Rome. He says, listen, pray for your authority. Those who are in authority, pray for them, that God would use them. And listen, that's really easy to do when you like the people who are in power, but when you don't, it's harder, right? But again, Solomon says in all of his wisdom, respect those who are in power. Trust what God's doing. Trust His timing, right? Trust that He has something in mind. And so again, as we continue his journey into Ecclesiastes, he gets into chapter 9, and he starts talking about, essentially he's talking about death. He's kind of already reflected on this a little bit in chapter 7, but he's really hitting home. And if you I don't know what your Bible says, but my Bible says at the top of the chapter, a common destiny for all. And Solomon is reflecting on what every human experiences. This is the beauty of Ecclesiastes, is everyone who lives on this earth can read this book and find themselves in it. So he starts in verse 1. It says, so I reflected on all of this, and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands. But no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny. The righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is a madness in their hearts while they live, and afterward they join the dead. Anyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. And I will stop there for right now, because I remember I talked about this when we got into the context of this. You have to understand that Solomon has no understanding of Jesus. He doesn't understand the resurrection. He doesn't understand the eternity of hope. So when he says that the dead have nothing, he's speaking merely from a human perspective, that in his life, all he knows is that when people die, they die, and there's nothing left. That's what he believes. Now, you and I, we have a little bit of hindsight because we see Jesus, and we understand that Jesus promised resurrection for those who believed in him. So when we talk about death, one of the things that, and I've had this conversation a lot in the last couple weeks, I don't like funerals. I don't think I've, you good, dude? Good? All right. Okay. I get that. I've been there, done that. All right. Sorry. I didn't mean to bring attention to that. So one of the things that I really don't like to do funerals, and I don't think I've ever met someone who really enjoys the funeral. But the one thing that I've experienced in my life is the funeral for someone who is a believer in Jesus is a whole lot different than a funeral of someone who's not. I've been asked to do funerals for people that don't know who God is, who haven't accepted Jesus, and I can tell you that my perspective is always to try to offer as much hope as possible to them, because families are grieving and they're broken. Now, when I have the privilege of doing a funeral of someone who has given their life to Jesus, there's not a whole lot of sadness in those moments. And it's not that we don't grieve. It's just we realize that the hope we have in Jesus is that in this very short life that we live, there's something after this, right? And so Solomon doesn't quite understand that in this moment. His reflection is almost, I don't know, it's kind of depressing. So he continues, and he says, in verse 7, he says, "Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life." By the way, this is one of my favorite verses, only because of how he ends it. He says, "Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life." It says that God has given you under the sun all your meaningless days, for this is not your lot in life, in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. If you have seen something else, I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. Stop there. Solomon says, listen, go and enjoy your life. Enjoy what God has given you. Enjoy the life with your wife. Eat, be merry, work hard. Do the things that you're supposed to do, because the reality is you and I have no idea when the end of this will come. And so Solomon is reflecting on his own life. And so the second half of last week was that we're supposed to be people of joy, right? So not only people of justice, but people of joy. And joy is such an interesting conversation because listen, there's a difference between being happy and being joyful. They're not the same thing. I can learn to be happy with things. But there's this joy that comes from knowing God. There's this joy that comes from following God that you and I are supposed to reflect that in the way that we live. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to act like everything is okay all the time. I think that's unrealistic. One of my favorite things, and it's kind of an older idea, but I still see it every now and then, is like when you ask someone, how's life? And they're like, I'm just blessed. And their house is on fire. And you're like, okay. Good approach. But you're allowed to be upset that your house is on fire. Like no one's mad at you about that, right? And again, the way we approach our life, we have to understand that you and I are called to be joyful. So it doesn't mean that everything's always going to be okay. That's unrealistic. But it means that in really difficult situations, you and I have a different outlook on it. We understand that God is sovereign. We understand that everything we have belongs to him anyways. Our job, our marriages, our kids, our bank accounts, our cars, our homes. Like everything you and I have has been given to us by God. And Solomon, when he's reflecting, says, listen, this is everyone's lot. God is sovereign over even those who are wicked. He knows what they have. He allows them to have it. And so you and I, when we look at our life, when we are struggling, and one of the hardest things in the world anymore is the comparison. We live in constant comparison to each other. It drives me insane. Like, churches online are a wonderful thing. It's not a bad thing. But we're constantly comparing preachers to preachers. We're constantly comparing churches to churches. We find ourselves, and I'm telling you, I fall into the same category. Like, I find myself oftentimes distracted by the fact that why can't I be like I don't know, I like Stephen Furtick. I know there's not a lot of agreement on that sometimes, but like, why can't I be someone who's like him? Why can't I be like that? And the problem is I get lost in that because I get confused by everyone else. And instead, I have to learn to embrace who I am, who God has made me, right? And so that's where joy comes from, is when we learn to embrace the lot we have in life, whether good or bad. That's where the challenge is, because for those who have things good, you and I assume they're always happy and they're always content. I've learned that's not always the case. Sometimes people who want more and more and more and more never have rest. I was in Africa last year, and I met some of the happiest people in the worst conditions I've ever seen in my life. They were happy. They were content. I saw these little kids kicking a rock down the street, and they were laughing. Because, I think we confuse it. That we convince ourselves that if I just have another thing, if I just have more, that I'll have joy. And listen, that's not biblical. Solomon says, enjoy your life. Enjoy what you have. Don't worry about chasing other things. Don't worry about whether or not what your neighbor has. Worry about you. Worry about your wife. Worry about your kids. Worry about your family. Because what you have, God has ordained that. That's his sovereignty. So eat, drink, be merry. God has approved these things. Listen, that's where real joy comes in, is when we can learn to be content with where we are. That word content has got to be the word that I hate the most. And if you've ever read any kind of leadership book or anything like that word just doesn't exist, because they're always strive for more, do more, be better, do this, push, push, push. But the wisdom of Scripture says, listen, enjoy what you have. Trust that God has given it to you. Trust that he is in charge of it. Eat and be merry. You and I are supposed to be people of joy. That's supposed to set us apart from the rest of the world. Listen, it's funny, but it's not. When you see someone who's in a bad situation and they say, oh, I'm blessed, I think they mean it. There are people that look at some of the toughest things in life and they say, you know what, it's going to be okay. Because they understand, like we should, that God's in charge anyways. Danny works with a lady, and I'm not going to share her name, but like, it was kind of crazy. In like a 2-week span, she lost her car because of flooding. Then they lost their house because of flooding. And then the house they were living in, because their house was being rebuilt, caught on fire and burned down. And I'm just like, what is happening? But that's the thing, though. Like, there are people who go through things like that all the time, and again, we don't have to say that it's easy, but we can acknowledge that God's in charge. That's what Solomon is saying. God is in control. Don't worry about the things you and I have no control over. Instead, eat and drink and be glad. Enjoy life with your wife under the sun. Now, I talked about it, but the funeral of a believer is way different than a non-believer. The one thing that I always hear at funerals for those who have loved ones who have given their life to Jesus is they always say, man, I have a weird peace about this. And I'm like, you should. It's not weird, by the way, it's scriptural. A peace that surpasses all understanding. Paul writes about this in his letter to the Philippians. He says, listen, I've learned to be content. I've learned to be in one. I've learned to be satisfied with whatever God has given me because I trust him. So again, Paul is reflecting Solomon's wisdom. I've learned to enjoy what I have, and I've learned to live in such a way that people know that. You and I are called to be people of joy. Doesn't mean we suppress how we feel. It doesn't mean we don't talk about bad things. It means we look at things from a different perspective. If you follow God, God is in charge anyways. He's not surprised by the things that happen to us, even when we are. So Solomon says, be people of joy. Be people who live a life of joy. And then as he gets into the end of chapter 9, he goes into verse 10. He starts talking about wisdom. So verse 13 says, I also saw under the sun the example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man, poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembers that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And we're going to get into chapter 10 in a second, because chapter 10 is just kind of like a bunch of one-off proverbs. But Solomon is saying, listen, wisdom is better than folly. We should seek wisdom. We should seek to be wise. We should seek to listen. We should seek to be people of thought. We should seek to be people who approach things, and he even says it in chapter 8 that when you're looking at the king, there's a time and a place to respect the king, to get things done. We should seek wisdom. You know, growing up, I always tell people that, like, before Jesus, I was like a different person. I did some dumb things. Some of those things were illegal. And I don't say that because I'm happy about that. I say that because upon reflecting upon my life, if I could go back in time to my 14-year-old self, I would ask me, what's wrong with me? But I'm hoping that I learn from those things, because I don't want my kids to repeat those things. That's what wisdom does. It allows us to reflect on life. So when I deal with, especially teenagers, you guys are listening, I promise us adults are not trying to ruin your life. Some of us just have wisdom. Not all of us. Some of us have wisdom, and we want you to do better than we do. We want you to live better lives. We don't want you to make the same mistakes. I don't want my kids to learn things the hard way. I would rather them be wise. And Solomon says this, it is better to be wise because fools seek out folly. He says in the shouts, it says, the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. People who are foolish, they tend to get in the way. They trip over themselves. When I was studying this week, one of the statements that I highlighted, it said, more often than not, fools don't realize they're fools. And I think that's true. Most people who are foolish don't realize they're being foolish because they think that they're right. But Solomon says, listen, seek to be wise. For those of you who are younger, seek the wisdom of those who are older. I know, seems counterintuitive, but I promise you our goal, as the older I get, is to help those coming after me to navigate life differently than I did. I've made a bunch of mistakes. I hope that I can teach others to be wise, and I look to the wisdom of others. We talk about this, or I talk about it a lot, like there's a reason why we have elders in this church. Not only is it biblical, but there's a group of men in our church who I go to when I don't know what to do. Because they have wisdom. They have wisdom that I don't. Solomon says, seek wisdom. Starting in verse 10, he gives off a bunch of proverbs. He says, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay a great offense to rest. There's an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that rises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. I think those are just like practical realities, right? If you dig a pit, you could fall. If you break through a wall, like get bitten by a snake. Verse 10, it says, if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. I knew I should have brought my axe today. Some of you know what I'm talking about. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning, their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. Woe to the land whose king was a servant, and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at a proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through laziness, the rafters sag because of idle hands. The house leaks. A feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. Do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. So let's just break this down real quick. Solomon starts off by saying, when you're talking about wisdom and folly, a little bit of folly can ruin your wisdom. I don't know if you ever noticed, but some of the wisest people I know, they make one mistake, and it sticks with them for the rest of their life. It says, just as dead flies give perfume a bad smell. It says, fools, they lack sense. They don't live like they're supposed to. They go against everything that tells them not to do it. And again, they're not even aware of it. Said, I've seen evil in the world, that some of the most foolish people sit in the positions that are the highest. He doesn't know why. He just knows that's how it seems to go. And he gives practical, says, practical wisdom. If you dig a pit, you fall into it. Break through a wall, you might get bit by a snake. He reflects back on chapter 9, says everything happens. Everything happens to people. No one is escaping it, right? So sometimes bad things happen that are out of our control. There's nothing we can do about it. Wisdom is understanding that. Gets into verse 10. So if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed. So work smarter, not harder, right? Said a snake bites before it's charmed. The charmer receives no fee. If you don't work hard, you don't get what you deserve. So this is my favorite. It says, words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning their words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. If that doesn't make you want to talk less, I don't know what it should. It says, fools multiply their words. It says, laziness. Because of laziness, the rafters sag. The house falls apart. It leaks. That a feast is made. Wine makes life merry. Money is the answer for everything. I don't agree with that. And if you do a little bit of research, the translation's probably not quite right. They think it's when you look back at the ESV's, the way the ESV talks about it, which is kind of more word for word, it says the consumption of money, right? The focus of money. And again, Solomon's kind of reflect on that money doesn't really matter. And so we culminate all this into next week, because all of this has a point. And Solomon is getting to a point, and I realize that so much of this it seems repetitive, but in his reflection, he says, enjoy life, but be wise. Don't be people who are foolish. Don't be people who make bad choices. Don't be people who allow yourself to be consumed with things that don't matter. It says enjoy your life, but be wise. And so as he gets to the last two chapters of Ecclesiastes, his answer will be, those who choose to enjoy life and those who are wise will seek God and follow his commandments. That's where we're getting to. We're not there, but that's where we're getting to. In all of his reflection, in all of his wisdom, in everything that Solomon has lived through in his life, he comes to the conclusion that those who are wise seek God first, always. We enjoy life because God has given it to us. I told you, the difference between the death of someone who follows Jesus and someone who doesn't is dramatically different. When I do funerals for people who are non-believers, I don't like it. Because I see so many people that don't have hope. They think this is it. They reflect on what the person did, and whether it was a long life or a short life, there's no hope. It's just, to them, it's hopeless. Because what was it all for? And I think Solomon does that. He's like, what is all of this for? But for those who follow Jesus, it's not the same. I'm 39 years old. I might have already lived half of my life. It's weird to think about. But every funeral that I go to forces me to reflect, as Solomon says, chapter 9, that everyone comes to the same end. Everyone dies. That's the reality. You and I, we don't get to escape this place. We don't get to avoid that. So the question is, what do we do with that knowledge? If we know that someday our life will come to an end, we can be foolish. We can live for ourselves. We can build our kingdom. We can try to gather as much as we want. We can chase after things that have no purpose and meaning. We can do all of those things. Or we can seek God. We can seek to live as people of God. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean it's always we don't get a pass. Even people who follow Jesus, their house still burns down. Solomon says, the fate of one is the fate of all. But what you do with that knowledge matters. For those of you who are younger, my wisdom would be follow God. Live for him. Seek him. Get plugged in. Find out what he's calling you to do in your life. You don't have to go through a bunch of crazy things to grow up. You don't. You can follow God even at the age you are now and let him change your life. You don't need experiences. You need Jesus. That's what matters. For those of you who might be in this place and you've never given your life to Jesus, my wisdom's the same. Follow God. Wherever you are in life, however old you are, there's still time. Solomon says, better a live dog than a dead lion, because the living still have a choice. Because at the end, when life comes for us, when we come to the point of our death, there's no turning back. So my prayer is, and my hope is, if I'm the one who does your funeral, don't make me have to lie about it. Follow Jesus. I want to celebrate the end of your life with the people who love you and look forward to the day that we meet you again.